Welcome to this European Liberal Forum interview. My name is Eloi Borgne and I'm a Junior Policy and Research Officer. We are currently in Vilvoorde, just outside of Brussels, at the Festival Ideas, which is organized by the VLD, Open VLD Party of Belgium. I'm joined today by Mr. Johan Norberg, a Swedish author, historian of ideas, and senior fellow at the Cato Institute. Known for his work on human progress from a liberal and global perspective, Johan has written influential books like Open, The History of Human Progress, The Capitalist Manifesto, and of course the latest Peak Human, which I've just read. I also saw it around the festival a few times, so I think you have some fans around here. His work offers a compelling case for openness, progress, and the power of free societies. Thank you for accepting to do this interview.
Thank you, my pleasure.
I propose we dive right into the questions. So as I just mentioned, I recently read your newest book, Peak Human, which I found very insightful, very interesting to explore from such a global perspective, human development. But my question to you is, beyond the obvious presence of digital innovation like phones and screens, how can people recognize tangible progress in their everyday lives?
That's a very good starting point. How do we notice progress? I mean, first of all, don't dismiss all the screens as lightly as it's easy to do, because there's a lot of distraction and stupidity on our screens too. But also, there's the accumulated knowledge of mankind at the tips of our fingers. For the first time in human history, we don't have to be ignorant. Ignorance is now a choice. That's a pretty remarkable achievement, I think. And, you know, with the maps on our phones, we never get lost anymore, which is an eternal human experience. And we never have to get bored, which is also kind of nice. But if you can look at progress in a broader manner as well, in different ways. If you look around the world, you can notice that since the turn of the millennium, some 130,000 people were lifted out of extreme poverty every day, mostly in countries that began to open up their societies and economies to the rest of the world, which is at least the greatest progress the world has ever seen. If you want to think about how we are doing here in Belgium or in Sweden, how do we see this progress? Well, it's not just about material progress, and it's also about how we can achieve things that we want. For example, longer lifespans and more years in good, decent health. I think if you return to 1950, average life expectancy in Europe was around 60 years. Here it was probably 65 or something like that. Now it's 82 here, so it's increased by 17 years. And that's pretty remarkable. It's because of science, technology, and growth and innovation. And it takes all of these things. We notice this because if we look at the less economically free countries, the least economically free quarter of countries, life expectancy there is still just 65 years. So it's 15 to 17 years longer in freer countries, which really means the difference between being able to possibly get grandkids and see them growing up. That's how you can see progress in your real life. The possibility of actually meeting grandkids if you get kids.
That's a very good point. And going back to the maps, I think personally I'm very dependent on Google Maps, so I'm glad this progress has happened and was much needed, I think, for many people. My second question is looking at a more European perspective. Would you say that currently in 2025 that there's a more nurturing culture? So openness, pluralism, free exchange of ideas, or rule of law? Or do you think we're going into a more suppressing condition with protectionism, fear-driven politics, barriers to mobility and trade?
Yeah.
Do you think that these are the right conditions in Europe for a supposed golden age, as you mentioned in humans?
I'm a little bit worried, I have to admit. The ancient Greek historian Thucydides, he talked about two different mentalities. It was the Athenian mentality of going out into the world, explore, learn, and acquire something new. Or the Spartan mentality of staying at home and trying to protect what you've already got.
Yes.
To me, it seems like Europe has shifted from an Athenian spirit to more of a Spartan one in just a short period of time. Partly because I think the world seems quite dangerous.
An external threat, yes.
It is a more risky world than we've experienced in a long period of time, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, geopolitical tensions, authoritarians on the march. But then I think it's very dangerous if that results in us becoming less innovative, less mobile, less open, because that will give us fewer opportunities, less knowledge and technology to deal with those threats and challenges. So we're in a bit of a tricky place right now, I think.
I think that's what we see, and that's what we've been discussing, I think, at this festival, which is, how to open up again, I think, and in such a more dangerous environment globally.
Yeah.
My next question is related to peak humans again. I really enjoyed the read.
Thank you.
I would say that a pattern I noticed in your book is that innovation and progress often emerge from a more open and pluralistic society. You outlined this quite a few times. Speaking of external forces, how do you then explain the great progress that China has made, for example, when we look at their rapid economic growth and technical innovation?
Yeah, that's an incredibly important question, because for some reason right now in Europe and America, it seems like lots of people and politicians are interested in imitating the Chinese model, because they think they are making more progress than we do. And then I would caution them and say, try to look at what was it that made this rapid economic technological progress possible, and what is it that's not really useful and we shouldn't imitate.
What we should take and what we should disregard.
And what we should take is that since the late 1970s, there's been tremendous progress where Chinese people have been allowed to experiment with strange new ideas, with new crops and secret privatization in agriculture, led to tremendous agricultural productivity, village enterprises, and then Deng Xiaoping, the then leader, said that if people are doing this, great. If they have a little bit more freedom, let's give them some free trade zones and places where they can really experiment with these ideas large scale. That's what succeeded when they opened up a few cracks in the Chinese wall, so to speak. What didn't work was the walls that still remain standing. Economically, we have big rust belts in China, state-owned enterprises that only create excess supply of overcapacity in manufacturing in different places. I think one very interesting example recently where they've done progress is AI, large language models.
With DeepSeek.
But where did DeepSeek come from? It did not come from any of Xi Jinping's favorite state companies. It didn't come from state universities. It didn't even come from state venture capital. It came from a quant hedge fund, which is a strange, exotic little industry that only exists because of previous deregulation. And Xi Jinping actually hates this industry and tried to squash it. But he didn't go that far, and suddenly they came up with these huge AI achievements. That, I think, tells us something about what works in China and what doesn't. It works as long as it's open for entrepreneurship and innovation. But when they centralize, when they command and control, it doesn't work. Don't imitate that.
Okay, so we should pick and choose what we think works and what would apply better in Europe.
Exactly.
My next question is, in Peak Human, you quote Kenneth Clark, who said, "Civilization's worst enemy is fear." How can liberalism better communicate its vision in an age of rising populism, as we can see in the European Parliament, but around Europe as a whole, especially among the younger generations in Europe? And can the liberal vision be updated to be more relevant and attractive now? I will say this is the topic that's come up the most for us at this festival, at least, where people come up to us and we discuss what European Liberal Forum does. And they often ask, how can we get more young people involved? And because it is a more elder population in the liberal perspective. So how do we innovate and allow for the younger generation to see the benefits of liberalism?
Yeah, and how do we communicate better? Well, we start by using microphones in a better way than I just did. So I got a good signal to do that. This is an incredibly important point, because fear is dangerous. Pessimism is dangerous because it's self-fulfilling. If you decide that everything is hopeless, well, why bother? Why even try to achieve anything? And then you become this Spartan who just stays at home, try to protect what you've got. We have to create a new sense of wonder around achievement, around progress, around innovation. The fact that the whole point with liberalism and with open societies is that it's open to surprises, is that it's selling something that's unpredictable, because we don't know yet what's the best solution to every problem. It has to come from unleashing the creativity of more people. And I think that we need to talk about that more, not the sterile political terms, but instead ally ourselves with the private sector, with innovation, with science, technology, to talk about the crazy, wonderful experiments that are going on in everything from culture to the startup scene, and to understand that they are our allies, they are our constituency. I think we can get a lot of hope and energy from doing that, but I also think that's a better way to sell our message than to talk about this the fear of missing what we've already got, to talk about how can we acquire the new and move into the future.
Yeah, I think that's what the right wing, the very extreme right wing parties thrive on. It's that promise of the golden past, which is strangely enough is my follow-up question is that many Europeans feel a nostalgia for this golden age, whether it be post-war prosperity or pre-globalization simplicity.
Yeah.
How can liberals sort of reframe the narrative to show that our best days are still ahead? You were talking earlier as well about how we're never bored anymore.
Yeah.
But maybe this has a role to play in the fact that people maybe look back a bit too much and no longer forward into the future.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think nostalgia is a useful emotion. For some reason, everybody's convinced that the best music that has ever been made in human history was created when they were between 13 and 15 years old. And that's the same for every generation. Yeah. Unfortunately, it seems like we think that society was the best when we were at that age as well.
Yeah.
I think that's fairly natural when it comes to human beings, but it's not a governing philosophy. And the danger is that when we confuse then our own emotions with the world and thinking that we're only deteriorating from now on, then we become fearful of change. We don't open up the new engines of growth and opportunity. And in that case, we don't have much to look forward to, so it's self-fulfilling. That's the problem, and that's why we need to really build these narratives of where we could be, what we could achieve. And I think then allying ourselves with the forces that drive progress in science, technology, and economy, that's incredibly important, because that's the tangible results of showing that it works when people are liberated.
Yes. At the European Liberal Forum, we really talk a lot about this idea of narrative and shaping the narrative of the future. So this is very insightful. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think also perhaps we need some fear as well, and tell people that, look, it's risky to be too risk averse.
Yeah.
It's dangerous if we don't keep on acquiring new knowledge and capacity, because in that case, it'll soon be over.
Yeah. Once we stop questioning, that's when it's over.
Yeah.
Then I have a more broad question. You draw from a range of thinkers, so Hayek, Mill, Condorcet, very famous liberal thinkers. Which historical liberal do you think Europe needs the most right now, and why?
That's a very good question. I think we need them all. Now it's an all hands on deck situation, so we really need to draw from historical principles to teach us something about how to update them and move forward.
Yeah.
But that's the point, that's the key. We need to study these thinkers to understand the received wisdom of centuries of knowledge about human nature and about human society. But then we constantly have to look at how do we apply them to the current controversies and current topics.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the best Amazon book review that I ever read. It was about John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, where they said, oh, this 170-year-old book or something like that, I'll only give it 2 stars, because while the principles sound all right, his examples are a little bit dated. And that's true, of course.
Yeah, of course.
It's our task to update them constantly.
Yeah, and the recent innovations, as we were talking about earlier, has changed the situation so much that it's sometimes hard to see ourselves in his examples. But yeah, I think the principles will always apply to human nature in some way.
Yeah.
So you in Peking, you highlight greatness. quite a bit as a society and as individual people. When you highlight this greatness, can we celebrate greatness without drifting towards a more elitist perspective? So how do we ensure that we leave no one behind when we consider these historical figures?
Yeah, that's an intriguing question, because if we celebrate geniuses like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci in art, what does that mean? Is it only a few brilliant geniuses that can come up with brilliant things? I don't think so, because when you look at eras of greatness, there are two things that stand out. The first one is that it only happens when you open up the playing field to more talent, because it often comes from unexpected places. That's what you notice. I mean, Leonardo was an orphaned nobody from a city outside of Florence, but made it because of the unique freedom of Florence in the Renaissance era. But also, the other thing that stands out is that it's an ecosystem. Few things end up with one genius coming up with brilliant ideas, whether in entrepreneurship or in politics or in art. It happens because there's an ecosystem of lots of people looking at the problems and then coming with their tiny bits and pieces of ideas that can help us all to move forward. And then eventually, with a few breakthroughs, if we're back to art, learning about oil painting, for example, new colors, different perspectives in art, and then thousands and thousands of people experiment in different workshops, often collaborating. That helps you to really push forward and find a few that can create sort of eternal masterpieces that we all benefit from. But then we must understand it's not the single genius, it's this ecosystem of talent, and then we can all benefit from it, because Leonardo's greatest achievement is not just sort of Leonardo's to be happy about. It's the whole world that can look at it, and it's the same thing with all the progress being made in technology or in business as well.
Yeah, so you're saying that these greats, quote unquote, are allowed to thrive because everyone has kind of brought their own piece to the puzzle and allowed them to reach that level of greatness. It's very interesting.
Exactly, and as someone once pointed out, how do you come up with the best football team in the world? Well, it's rarely by just buying one incredible star player. It's by giving everybody a football and experiment and see what happens, and then a few people will rise and become brilliant.
You don't know how much that resonates with me as a PSG fan. My team we had one season where we brought in 2 or 3 genius players, including Messi, and we did not do very well.
Right.
And then the one season where we brought a few young players and made everyone play, that's when we really picked up, and we won last year thanks to that. So it's a very accurate.
You just improved the metaphor tremendously.
There we go.
I'll steal that.
Perfect lineup.
And again, we can see how collaboration then works out better. Because a little bit of piece of the puzzle.
We're both open, and so we both bring our own part of the cake. In your book, so Following Greatness, in your book you stress that greatness often emerges when constraint and challenges push people to innovate. Do you think that today's crisis in Europe, highlighting mainly climate, security and demographic shifts, could these be catalysts for similar breakthroughs, or are we too risk averse in Europe?
We'll see. But this should be a moment to really focus our minds, because in relaxed, calm times, we can afford to make so many stupid mistakes. We can afford to hold back creativity and innovation because we'll muddle through somehow. But when it's existential situation, when we are really facing existential problems, ranging from totalitarian dictatorships in our vicinity threatening us, to environmental challenges, to the demographic situation, we are going to have to make this work now. And I think there's hope. There's more of a discussion about perhaps we can't afford to be too protectionist and too heavy-handed when it comes to regulation, because now we're just going to have to move forward. So I think there's some hope, and we'd better get it right.
Yeah, yeah. I think in particular with climate change, I think now is the time to act, and giving restraints here is not the solution. I think we really need to push forward these new technologies and new solutions to really do something about it.
Yeah.
And I think this also resonates a lot with the younger generation in particular.
I think so
But
too.
you often write about the role of globalization in general in human flourishing once again. So there's these constraints, but there's also globalization which helps. With Europe facing growing protectionist pressures, what risks do you see if we retreat from this openness? As you mentioned, we become more protectionist, both from economic growth and for producing the next the golden generation, I guess.
Then it's over.
Yeah, okay.
Because, you know...
That's when pessimism takes over.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we're 500 million people, so it's not that bad, and our economy is big, but... You know, we're getting older, and the demographic situation is challenging, and most of the new ideas, most of the new creativity and new business models will appear elsewhere in the world. How do we benefit from that? Only by being open to it, only by receiving those influences, facing the competition, and then using that to add our own creativity and build on top of that. Which is why we can really thrive as an open Europe, open to all this exchange, intellectual and economic, constantly. But if we become so fearful of it that we shut our minds to it, we are the ones who are going to lose out. That's why it's so incredibly important right now to move forward with things like new trade agreements with the rest of the world, with Mercosur in South America, with India, with the Trans-Pacific Partnership countries in the Americas and Asia and so on. If we can do this, that I think we can save an open world order, but more than that, we can save Europe and keep on making this a more pleasant place.
That's true, and we often forget that the EU is the biggest trading bloc, so we sort of have the most to lose in the case of such a protectionist world.
Yeah.
Yeah, economically and demographically as well. So moving on to my final question. Your work often defends the Enlightenment legacy of so reason, science, and progress. If you were to craft a sort of new Enlightenment message for 21st century Europe in 2025, what would be its core principles?
The core principles for a new Enlightenment would, I think, have to be composed of two things. And they're all both about the way we look at knowledge. So in a way, it's epistemological.
Yeah.
The first thing is that our concepts, our ideas, and our principles have to be related to reality. We constantly have to ask ourselves, what phenomenon in the real world makes these concepts and these principles important and real?
Yeah.
That's how we continue to see that it's relevant. That's how we test those ideas, whether they work vis-a-vis reality or not. And that's how we avoid superstition, which is a threat to all our principles.
Yeah.
But the second one is that we should always realize that what we know is limited in relationship to what is left to discover out in the world. So dare to be impressed and surprised and in awe about things that happen in the future. I think that's the forward motion. If knowledge tied to reality is the sort of the anchor for an Enlightenment ship, then the sort of the thing that makes us constantly propel forward is the idea that there's so much left to discover, to explore, and if we're open to those surprises, to find new grounds and meet new challenges, then we'll find a better tomorrow than if we stay in the harbor.
That's a wonderful core tenet, I think. Yeah, I think it goes back to we're often bombarded with a lot of information. We have the whole knowledge of the world at our fingers. So I think, yeah, we need to remember that a lot is still to be discovered. A lot is yet to be achieved. So I think that's what we should finish on, the liberal perspective of looking forward. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And yeah, I will see you again soon. Thank you very much.